Hello, and welcome to the very first episode of this new series, where we explore anime villains through the lens of psychology. This isn't about clarifying evil. It's about understanding the very real human complexities hidden behind their actions. And today, we're starting with a character whose story isn't just about destruction, but about trauma, identity, and that thin fragile line between being a victim and being an antagonist. This is the story of Shigaraki Tomura from My Hero Academia. Shigaraki's journey isn't one of senseless villainy. It's the story of what happens when a young mind is shattered too early, too violently, and left with no one to help piece it back together. His story reminds us that sometimes evil isn't born, it's created. Let's start with one of the most important parts of his character, his trauma. What happened to Tenko Shimura long before he ever called himself Shigaraki is a devastating example of what psychologists call complex trauma. This isn't just a single tragic event, it's a whole chain of them, piling up before he even had the emotional tools to process what was happening to him. The sudden, uncontrollable manifestation of his quirk led to the accidental deaths of his entire family. In that single moment, Tenko's world was shattered. He was alone, scared, and completely powerless. In the real world, this kind of experience often leads to something known as complex post-traumatic stress disorder, or C-PTSD. And we can actually see those symptoms reflected in how Shigaraki behaves throughout the series. He shows signs of emotional numbness, violent outbursts of anger, physical manifestations of distress, like scratching his neck raw, and deep, crushing feelings of shame. He doesn't just act out of anger. He's carrying unresolved grief and rage that no one helped him work through. And when society abandoned him, All for One stepped in, exploiting that pain and turning it into something even darker. But trauma alone doesn't explain everything about Shigaraki's behavior. As his story progresses, we start to see patterns that resemble personality disorders. And while we can diagnose fictional characters, it's interesting to observe how these patterns match real psychological concepts. One possibility is that Shigaraki shows signs of borderline personality disorder, or BPD. People with BPD often struggle with an unstable sense of self, and with Shigaraki, we're constantly watching him wrestle with his identity. Is he Tenko? Is he a villain? Or is he nothing more than a tool of All for One? His emotional reactions are often intense and impulsive. His relationships unstable, and there's a constant underlying fear of abandonment. That's symbolized perfectly by the grotesque way he clings, literally, to the hands of his deceased family members. They're both a punishment and a comfort, a constant reminder of who he's lost and the shame he carries. At the same time, Shigaraki displays traits that overlap with antisocial personality disorder, especially in his willingness to harm others without remorse, his aggressive and violent tendencies, and his complete disregard for societal norms. But here's the key difference. Unlike characters who are just evil for the sake of being evil, Shigaraki's violence comes from a deeply broken logic system. He's not killing for fun. He's doing it because in his twisted worldview, destruction feels like the only path left. And behind all of this, there is dissociation. Dissociation is one of the mind's strongest defense mechanisms when dealing with trauma. It's that feeling of being detached from your body, or from reality itself. Shigaraki has moments when he doesn't just act violently. He looks absent, as if he's been hollowed out. His mind shuts down as a way to protect itself. even if that protection leads to terrible consequences. But perhaps the most fascinating part of Shigaraki's psychological profile is his ongoing identity crisis. He's constantly torn between the boy he used to be, the villain he's been molded into, and the pawn All for One wants him to remain. Later in the story, this battle isn't just psychological, it's physical. His body and mind literally start fighting back against the control of others, symbolizing that deep, desperate struggle to reclaim himself. Now, here's where Shigaraki becomes something more than just a villain archetype. Because he's not pure evil. Unlike All for One, who is driven by pure ego and manipulation, Shigaraki's motives come from a broken sense of justice. He doesn't want to destroy the world just because he enjoys chaos. He wants to destroy the world because to him, it's the only way to stop others from suffering like he did. It's a tragic, distorted version of justice, but it has roots. It has logic, even if it's twisted. His violence isn't about malice, it's about control. About fighting back against a world that made him feel helpless and worthless. That's what makes him a tragic villain, not a monster, but a broken person who was never given the tools to heal. And if someone, anyone, had stepped in early enough, his entire life could have been different. So that leaves us with one final difficult question. Can trauma turn someone into evil? Psychologically, what we see in Shigaraki is how unprocessed trauma, combined with constant manipulation and emotional isolation, can twist a person's worldview so badly that destruction feels like the only answer left. And when someone loses their identity and their support systems, when they start to believe that their pain is the only truth left, violence can start to feel like a form of liberation. That's not an excuse for what he does, but it is an explanation. And when we take the time to ask why someone like Shigaraki became this way, we're doing something important. We're replacing judgment with understanding. And understanding is often the first step to compassion, even toward those we might otherwise call villains. So what do you think? Was Shigaraki always destined to fall into villainy? Or was he just another casualty of a system that failed him? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you enjoyed this dive into anime psychology, don't forget to subscribe for more.